All right, thank you for everybody for coming. I'm not gonna, obviously, I don't teach for a living, and so I'm gonna pale in comparison to Professor here. You did awesome, thank you. I'm gonna take just 30 seconds to just explain, from a background point of view. We turn around companies. That's what we do for a living. And we deal with, as Mr. Balls would say over there, this notion, just so you're getting something, I wanted you to hear this. When we run companies and we have communities, I don't know if you can hear me over there. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. That's okay, that's okay. It's important. We are so concerned about our communities and our educations and our healthcare systems. Like this notion of for 6 years, for some of you who know me, I did political advisory work in state legislatures. This is before actually kind of going in the business world. And, I had to work with politicians and legislation and deal with all these very complicated hybrid issues at, small schools like Columbia and Brown. The small, tiny universities next to Piraeus, actually. And, running companies, we are so concerned about our communities and our healthcare systems and our education and our K through 1 and our pre-K kindergartens and the hospitals and the care for us in the communities, whether it's in, Matamoros or, Fort Smith, Arkansas, or up in Biddeford, Maine. We take a really interest in that. And, that may be atypical, we don't think it is, but for those who say, oh, you can't run a government-like business, it just boggles my mind, because we've done both, okay? We've run very successful companies that have turned around, and we've also worked in government for 6 years. And what I've seen in government, very, very quickly, and I only have less than a minute, is what I find is very, very poor training. Human capital resource management is almost non-existent. Real decision-making on major categories of investments is fractional. You don't have management from a comparison point of view. And most of what we've seen when we look at the return on assets and their comparison, whether it's good net worth or bad net worth, it's a net worth number. And the issue is, what did you do when you made major decisions? And most of the politicians who I've worked at, when they made the major decisions, didn't even ask the question, what was the change in net worth? It was, I wanted to cut my pension life down from 60 to 55 years because I needed the firemen. And it wasn't like, well, oh, by the way, that added $1 billion of net worth. Well, no, it didn't, because I don't have any cash on that. Or I was going to assume the Tata Steel plant, environmental liabilities for the jobs. Or that was $15 billion you had to put on your books. Oh, no, it didn't, because I don't really talk about net worth. Oh, I'm going to assume the pension fund liabilities of certain employees, companies, because I got to keep them. Don't put that, don't tell people what the real number is. That's the reality. So as a business point of view, when I sit back and I look at that, there aren't, you have multiple constituencies. You have a wide range of constituencies. You want good numbers, and that gets to transparency. So that was kind of my overview. I'm going to talk about a very nerdy topic. It's not going to appeal to a lot of you. It's about numbers, very, very simply. And it's about bringing Western democracy transparency to Greece. This is and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this. 5 simple things, okay? I'm going to give you some real background, and I'm going to talk about what is debt relief, because there's this term that everybody uses, and it's drives a lot of people crazy, and no one asks, how do you quantify it? Are there rules? Now let's talk about debt relief. They didn't get it. They did get it. How much? Well, there are rules? Of course there are rules. Then we're going to talk about this annual debt service metric that's come up that is massively miscalculated. Then we're going to talk about balance sheet net debt. We'll probably go through a little because you already did that. And then we actually have a working draft of a Greek government balance sheet, general government, which I think you'll find will be talked about more later in some of the presentations. And then I'm going to talk about human capital management in the context of a government. Not from an economist's point of view, but from a real manager's point of view, like how many hours do I spend, meritocracy, evaluation, and promotion. Very, very different, and I can do this pretty quickly. Let's see, so first, the background. What is Western government democracy transparency? For us, Western democracy government transparency is all about giving your voting citizens, which would include us, the necessary financial information on a timely basis in order for there to be an accountability for the government's decisions. If you want to make the decisions, go ahead. But give the information timely. Don't give it 15, 18 months after the fact, and don't hide it. That gives trust, that gives confidence. That's the start. Why do you want to build transparency? It builds trust and confidence. From a taxpayer's point of view, yeah, we pay 55% or whatever it is, and we're happy to do it in the US. Because we have, as bad as you may say it is or is not, I'm not saying you did say it was, we have trust. Like, we pay it. We'd never think not of paying it. We have trust and confidence in the government. Regardless of the party, we believe in the system, and we believe that there's, a good use of taxpayer money. It attempts to combat corruption, global competitive comparability so we can look at them. It reflects economic reality. You're not gaming the system. It's accuracy, and it's auditable. So if you don't want to sign the opinion, as in the other countries as well, but at least you have one, and it's citizens friendly. It's not hidden. Why a balance sheet? You need a balance sheet. It provides transparency and accountability, builds trust and confidence. It helps in decision making. If you're going to say, do you care about a better net worth, or lower or higher? Well, it's like, okay, what was the decision? What was the impact? Let me see the number. Don't hide the number, because you want my vote. You want my tax dollars. We want the transparency to see it. And if you read the footnotes, the UK's footnotes or Canada's footnotes, they're awesome. And there's great disclosure, which you don't see in statistics. And it combats corruption. What is a balance sheet? Ian talked about this. It's not to be minimized. There is assets, we call them debts, and I'm not to select out Mr. Balls again, but I will. We initially had this to be total liabilities. And in our conversation, it was like, well, the taxpayer won't know what a liability is. So we simplified it and made it debt. It's a total debt. A citizen knows what debt is. He gets credit cards probably. And it's assets and debts. That's your net worth. It's much, much simpler than structural deficit adjusted for GDP. Like debt, it's like, these are real simple. Everybody knows that. And there are international rules. So it's really simple. There's 20 examples here, and I'm not going to go through any of them. But over the last 4 years of working in Europe and Greece, here are 20 specific examples where, had net worth been calculated, the decision might have been different and what they were making to do. And we went through, here's actually like real examples. It's not theoretical. There's page 1, page 2, page 3. They're on the website, the sessions website. They're also in a packet which you also have, which is this, the 140-page presentation, which we did at the FT, which has a lot of background in it. And it will give you example after example of good decisions. Did you even understand the impact? No, it wasn't even quantified. They're made like a shoestring. You wouldn't do that in any organization. But transparency helps. There are accounting standards, whether it's IPSAS, IFRS, GAAP. Organizations which surprise everyone. Like, again, if you're a board member at these organizations, and we're at the European Union, at IFRS, EFSF, at the IMF, where's Marco, where's Erwin? Are you guys around here? Yeah. These are your financial statements. Why do you think they publish them? Why do you think they have them audited? The World Bank, OECD, they all have the same standard. They all publish balance sheets. You want the transparency. You want to know the numbers. Now, countries that have quality financial statements, you can see the flags. I don't have to go through them. You'll see UK. And I think actually, not to again select out Mr. Balls, but I think you actually initiated this back in 2010. A little before, maybe? 1998, and the first one was published in 2010. It took a while, but it's comprehensive. It's very well detailed. How well is it used for management, for my conversations? I don't want to push it, but not much. Okay, you got US, you got Canada, you got, Israel is now on IPSAS, so you got that. And then you got your emerging countries, like Portugal, which, in terms of being a leader and wanting to put in new systems, absolutely awesome. If you go and you spend time with them, they really want to become like a leader in financial transparency. All the companies do. I know for those who don't like companies, but they're like, these are the rules. And then one quick segue is for debt, which is what I'm going to talk about in debt relief. Okay, we have all these other entities, all these other accountings, right? For those who study SNA or ESA, it is not so different. They're not as detailed. They're like 5 little paragraphs. But as the slides show, there's a summary manual called the MGDD, which some people had used for Greece and elsewhere. And I've shared this with a number of people for the last 2 years. We're clearly right. The manual's wrong. It's just wrong. There's been papers written on it since then. We've done OECD presentations. Not so everybody goes, well, so big deal. The manuals often are wrong. They're prepared by different people. If you look at the actual base documents, you'll see that the manual at the top, which is the summary manual, which was used to calculate like the non-debt, it's just wrong. And we go through and we do the illustration, and this is all in the packet. Not going to do it, but it's kind of neat. Same with concessional lending. They're not using it. The standards are the standards. They're massively clear when you calculate debt and debt relief. And you can go through, check the little arrows. We did them with highlights, so you can follow them. I'm not going to do them now, but they're here. We've done them at the OECD. We've done them at the rating agencies. Like, they're similar to international accounting standards, but if you're an economist, you have a statistician, you kind of hope the statistician calculated the numbers correctly, didn't you? You're not going to go read the manuals. No, but we have. Okay, I'm not going to do these two examples, but they're just like so obvious. If you have debt, and one debt is 10%, and it's 120,000 euros or whatever loan, and you change that, and you put a 1% interest on it, and you extend it out to 40 years, and you don't have to have any principal on it, it's not the same debt instrument. That's why all the rules, that's why the systems of national accounts and ESA, it changes the transaction. There's debt relief that's happening here. And this is already gone. You talked about net debt. You have two different borrowers. One pisses away the money, expends the money in different paths, doesn't have it. And the other one invests it in treasury bills. They both don't have the same debt number. Flaw Maastricht. And then when you talk about your interest expense, okay, just to give you a other example, is one case where you actually pay the 10% interest, and then in our local friends on the Aegean's case, you pay the interest, but you get back on some of the loans rebates for the interest and 20 to 30% of the principal. So in Mario Draghi's new language, that's called negative interest rates. A new accounting term which didn't even exist until the ECB kind of started moving on negative interest rates. Well, they did exist. If you only have to pay back part of your principal and you don't pay the interest, that's called negative interest. Okay, here's a quick example. We're doing okay, I think, for time. 2015. You've heard Greece debt relief. When they're going to get debt relief? They have to do something for debt relief. Greece got $17 billion of debt relief in 2015 under any rule, whether it's economist rule, SNA, ESA, IFRS, IPSIS, US GAAP, if you ever wanted to use it. You get $17 billion. You can't deny it. And this is a little balance sheet. You start off with a T account. You have assets and liabilities. Helpful to do net worth. See, this is an example where net worth can actually. Now, which one would you prefer? Would you prefer to be negative 16, or if somebody gave you that transaction and gave you the 17, and you're able to repay 5% debt that was due at face with 40-year paper that had 0.75% interest and a 20-year deferral on it, and you could take $5 billion and invest it in 8% COCOs? Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Okay? This is what net worth helps you to do in a framework. These are the tool. It's liberation and freedom to use the numbers. You can accomplish so much more as an economist if you talk to finance and accounting people, but the accounting people don't really want to talk to you because they're afraid of you. They are afraid. Ed, they're afraid of you because you talk GDP, you talk balance of payments. Ooh, right? Okay, so that's it. Going forward, the next thing you hear is, well, we're negotiating. Right? How many? It's mind-numbing. Built into the third program is every euro that comes in, because of the terms in your refinancing paper, that's about 5%. 80% of that is debt relief. Again, under statistics standards, under accounting standards, under any standard, it's debt relief. So when they say there isn't built in, there is debt relief. It's already been agreed to. You can ignore it. You can not want to make it. And if you're a certain political person, nobody wants to touch it. But it is there. Any rule you use, there's actually more. So every time, like if another 3.5 comes in, 80% of that is going to increase your net worth. Any rules, ESA, SNA, Section 2230 of ESA, it's there. You don't want to ignore it, fine, for political reasons or whatever, but it is there, that's the reality. Annual debt service matrix. You'll see a slide later, which it's good, nice to see, where they use the ESA number for interest, which is good, but a couple of other big buts. One, you have interest deferrals for like 10 years. You have rebates on the interest, which I'm going to show a slide that you did get. You get rebates on the principal, and you get the interest you earned on $5.4 billion, of which $4 billion was in 8% COCOs. When you calculate your interest number, you just don't slavishly take the top. You really should kind of grab some accountants who do this for a living, because there's a lot of detail behind it. You need them. You can't just wing this stuff in an hour or 2 hours or bring some people. You need to bring in skilled people who understand this. Look what the number changes into. As a percentage of revenue, which is how we look at it, because we're kind of more revenue, we can look at GDP, look at the comparison, and we do peer comparisons. The peer comparisons we look at are Portugal, not surprisingly, Ireland, Spain, and Italy. On a proper basis, reflecting economic reality, if I give you money for interest here, and you give it back to me immediately, am I still saying I'm burdened with interest? Obviously not. And you just hear this repeated, but you need professionals like from PwC and other firms who happen to be based in Greece to help you do this work. Otherwise, you're going to be repeating the wrong numbers, the comparisons look bad, and you end up suffering because of it. By the way, did they get the ANFA S&P numbers? Okay, thank you very much. You've heard this comment, well, we didn't get the S&P ANFA money, for those who know the inside of the situation. It was a Bank of Greece document. Okay, if you want the URL, we can give it to you. Okay, what came in and when did it get the money? And the response was, well, we didn't get it. It's like, no, it's in your escrow account. And if it's in your escrow account, it's an asset, okay? Disclose it. Don't make us and don't force us as investors to go to some obscure Bank of Greece document, which how many people probably read? 2. And we have to unfortunately be one of them, okay? Okay? This gross financing need comment you've heard, which is the IMF's latest evaluation. It's repeated in the press constantly as debt service. It's not debt service. In fact, most of it has nothing to do with debt. If you look at the percentages, it's put in everything from rebuilding cash buffers, to fiscal deficit, to paying arrears. No. Don't call it debt service. Debt service is interest expense and principal expense. And when you talk to reporters, whether it's the FT, the Wall Street Journal, and Bloomberg, and you ask them, they go, oh no, it's interest expense and principal. That's what the number is. Like, no, that's not what GFN is. It's gross financing needs, so let's just get it right. And when you do the comparison, look at the difference. You drop from the top up there, which is 19%, and you kind of cascade it down. You're looking at look at the big slugs. You got some interest expense, you got deferred interest, you get ANFA rebates, you got other, and you kind of work it down. You can reconcile the numbers. It's like a fraction, and it brings you back to here, which is where your interest expense is. It's a fraction of your peers. Get the numbers right. Okay, you've heard the debt hump. You guys probably have heard the debt hump if you're an infant. There's this debt hump in 2022. It was an Excel spreadsheet error. Okay, here's the Excel spreadsheet. The errors circulate. They put the number in the wrong cell. Okay, and this is if you want the Excel spreadsheet, we can give it to you. It's in the wrong cell. And we verified that accordingly with all these other sources, and that's why you've kind of heard less about the debt hump lately. You need professionals. You need your accountants. They should be your right-hand people. You want them. They're not competing for your power. They're there to help you make better decisions on your analysis. You can improve your return. Your accountants are not your enemy. A bad net worth, a good net worth, they're there to give you the tools so you can properly understand highly, highly complicated transactions and situations. Use them to your advantage. Balance sheet statistics. George had already, Professor Kazarian had already done that. You look at your net debt numbers, which is really what you should look at. You can look at either gross debt under balance sheet or net debt. Greece is a fraction. Be transparent. It's about transparency. How do you expect to gain trust and confidence if you're going to tell people there's been no debt relief? And oh, by the way, we got 17 billion last year, and I'm going to say it's zero. And you want trust, and you want confidence. If you're lying about that, what else? I'm sorry, lying, I shouldn't have said that. If you're not disclosing that, what else aren't you disclosing? These are comments. There are a lot of people who understand it. The economists call it present value. It's really not present value. It's called debt at amortized cost. But to get an economist to say debt at amortized cost, Vincent, will you even say the word debt at amortized cost? No. He would, by now, they like present value. They taught it was in the initial textbooks, the Samuelson textbooks, some of the other ones they read. They call it present value. It's really not what it is, but intellectually, it kind of helps people understand it. Pretty much people get it. This is the first time you're going to see this. There's a full presentation on it later. This is the first attempt at a Greece government balance sheet. Like we've been working on it for 4 years. It's not like the massive ones you see in the UK annual reports, but it's a shot to try to understand what is Greece net worth. You might hate the number, you may not like it, you may want best worst. What the hell is the number? And how is it changing? And what decisions are you making? Questions at the end, questions at the end, questions at the end. Okay? Financial assets, the sources, Chris Magarian and PwC will go through this at tremendous detail and a presentation. I just wanted to kind of let you know that the work's there, so it's worthwhile to stay tomorrow, if you can't, or later, and they'll walk through. What you'll see is you got non-financial liabilities, financial liabilities, and they're going to go through the back. The issue is you got 131% of GDP is the negative net worth, and then the question should be, how does that compare to everyone else, and how has it changed? Yes, but now you have numbers to start talking. You were just hiding the pension before and not quantifying. And before you start making pension cuts, or start making them, maybe you want to know what your number is. Okay, performance gap. Why hasn't this happened? Greece has been trying this 7 times. Legislation passed, and for some reason, it like always stalls and doesn't go, but I know the reason. The reason is the people in charge have never done it before. They've never done it. This is a highly complicated issue. When you talk to Dean Likerman at London Business School, who I think Ed Balls also knows, you know Dean Likerman, he will tell you that on certain parts of their preparing their balance sheet, he said, I could have given it to one of the accounting firms. It might have taken them 5 to 6 years, cost us hundreds of millions, when in fact, because we knew what we were doing, we got it done in record time for like less than $1 million. That's how wide the gap is. You set up a task force to do this, which was done in May of last year. You know, in all good faith, you expand it, you put 28 people on the committee. One's a CFA and he's retired. What do you think's gonna happen? It's not gonna go anywhere. Why do you think they have no balance sheet? They're still on single entry accounting. Like, they don't have fixed assets. Why don't they have fixed assets? Because there's no flow that goes into the stock. And if you don't have a stock for your fixed assets, you know what happens to them? They walk away. And you can't even tell, and I mean walk away to like other places, and you don't get to record them. We've seen it in our maquiladora operations, our Venezuela operations, and the governments we've seen with the lack of management and oversight and training and civil infrastructure is vastly worse. Suggestion, if it's gonna actually get implemented in Greece, is you need a professional to lead. You talked about leadership. You need someone who's done it, has 10, 15 years of experience, is willing to do it pro bono, international integrity. He's got to have had successful growth experience, knows a turnaround. Like, I can't make your shoes unless you've done an apprentice, you know, like on Jeremy Street or whatever. But you're going to hire someone to do the work who's never had any experience? It's absurd. It will never, never, never happen. They have to have unparalleled knowledge of the Greeks' finances and the Europeans. They have to know France. They have to read finances balance sheet. They have to know the UK. They have to sit down with, you know, with the people who work on them. And they got to understand their material. They have to understand you know, where the UK is, where France is, where Portugal is, where Spain is. They have to have read them. They have to understand this. They need to know all the intricacies. They don't have time to get up to speed, and they don't have time to make mistakes. You bring someone in there who has no idea what they're doing. They're just going to make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. They need to understand 100-day plans. 100-day, operational, you get it done. You have a mission, you got a balance sheet, you get it done. They're not there to engage in social engineering. That's like, they got plenty of other people who want to talk about everything else. Their job is to get a balance sheet produced ASAP, because if you do not have a balance sheet, you do not know where you're standing at this point in time. I can't even begin to debate the issue, or discuss the issue, or analyze the issue, because they don't have a balance sheet, they don't have fixed assets. We don't know what they are. Forget putting provisions on. I mean, you have a nuclear decommissioning as a provision on your balance sheet. You know, so it's like, no, just get a basic balance sheet. Understand your deferred, understand your receivables, understand your payables, what the reduction is. You have asset impairments that you built, and they got declined because nothing happened. They got to understand the rating agency frameworks inside and out. Inside and out. They got to understand why, because they're going to economists, they're going to not want to look at your financial numbers. You have to sit there and explain it to them, walk through their own methodology. That's important. They got to know the capital markets. It managed at least, you know, we say 5,000 people for an entity the size of Greece. And it's got to be pro bono. We ran an ad on this. We got 100 people who are interested. This is like a legendary accomplishment that you don't need to be a cynic here. This is not to be a cynic. Now, that was it. I had a couple of appendices since I have a few more minutes. Oh, this is a summary, just if you wanted to take a look at the Greek numbers real quickly and say, okay, so what is the comparison to the peers? I think Dean Holder made that comment. You got to compare to peers. Like, where do you stand? Well, let's look at a wide range of metrics. Like basically every debt metric you can. Balance sheet net debt. Look at the ratings, all investment grade. Look at the balance sheet debt metrics. Not what's reported. They're reported as this mythical monster, the devil, the 175 future face value, which is like beyond ridiculous. Annual debt service, when calculated correctly, like half of the peers. Interest payments, net interest payments calculated correctly is a fraction. Next year's funded debt service, out 5 years, it's a fraction. You can run the numbers, and if anyone really wants to spend the time and more than just kind of have a casual conversation, we have more than happy to spend days, and if you're like in a position of influence, weeks or months educating you on this. Now, that was it. These were the kind of the backup slides, which is very important because it gets to the issue of more macro level of discussion. Okay, we have 8 benchmarks we look at for accounting. One of them is the UK, one of them is France, kind of the big ones. We have Switzerland, we have Canada, Australia, Israel, Switzerland. There's 8 of them. And we go through and we actually read their balance sheets to understand like what's happening, right? We do, and they can really tell you things. Look at the sizes based on the categories. Loans, advances, inventory, PP&E. These are big relative to GDP. These are the high ends for the 8. These are big components to manage. Someone has to manage the provisions. These are day-to-day operational activities that have to happen and may be very boring to some people, but they need to be managed professionally. Look at the magnitude of these. When you group assets and liabilities, and why do we do that? We do that from a management point of view, because that's what we have to manage. That's what you're a steward. As a government official, you're and the opposition party, and the incumbents, or like one or whatever, there's stewardship responsibility. Look at the magnitude relative to GDP, and I'm not going to debate is GDP like a good number or not. Like, that's not my expertise. Let's just take it and say by default you have to use it, okay? Look at the magnitude. The UK, 274% of its GDP is its assets and liabilities. These are huge. They're huge. How do you measure your management? They all show a net worth, which a lot of people initially would tell us governments don't have a net worth, right? Ian, you've heard that, haven't you? Well, they have assets, they have liabilities. It's like, well, they freeze. No, you have both. You can understand them. You can't deny them. You have a net worth, and what's happened to it? How has it changed? How is it evolving? Net worth per citizen. Don't tell them this, by the way. If you're an elected official, don't even talk about the negative net worth you have persistent. Keep them stupid so they don't even know the number. Never mention it. That's how you survive in politics, right? That's how you destroy a country too. All right? Look at them. Look at the ranking. Not surprising. This kind of country in the Aucklands or where I don't know if that's where it is, but like, they happen to have positive. So would you rather have positive or negative? Like, is a starter? Yeah. Okay? Like, really hard answer. There's 8 million other things that's going to go into it, but look at the cascading. And then it gets even more interesting, okay? You start saying, okay, we look at this value creation ratio, and we say, okay, let's marry. We've talked about this, okay? So, open disclosure, all right? We say, okay, the status quo is to use endpoint stock numbers, the annualized flow, debt to GDP, stock and flow, right? Everybody uses it, nobody even questions it. Nobody, maybe they do, okay? Small step forwards or start to measure like the change in GDP over your change in debt. Like if you're really managing your government well, like, so how much did your GDP go up and how much did your debt go up during the year? If you added $5 billion of debt and your GDP stayed flat, is that a conversation that's different from having your GDP go up by 5 and your debt not go up by anything? Is there potentially some management differences there? Good indication that something's going on, especially if they have better systems and better controls. So then we go to one that actually kind of takes the two. And we say, okay, let's take net worth, right, which is the change in net worth, and let's look at your change in GDP. If you do stock and flow above, then it's okay to do stock and flow here. It's a metric. Not saying causal link, not saying correlation, although I might say that if you want my vote at the end of the year, which if the GDP went up, you're sure as hell going to ask for the vote. If it went down, you're going to blame the administration before it. So here's what we did. We do a value creation ratio. And we talk about, how politicians want to claim credit, when the countries are doing well and the GDP is going up. Well, in reality, they should also take responsibility for the change in net worth. You can't have it both ways. You want to claim credit for good times? Well, tell people what happened with the financials as well. Don't hide it. It's about transparency. It's about accountability. It's about building that trust and confidence that you're really telling the truth. And I mentioned the causal relationship, and of course that's giving the government the full credit for the GDP increase. Here's some of the numbers. We did this analysis. We took all the information that was available. New Zealand goes back 15 years. UK, I think, goes back to 2010. France goes back to 2007. And some of them go back, Canada, Australia go back longer. These are audited financial statements on a consolidated basis. The UK is the only one, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me, who actually does whole of government, and which is a really accomplishment. They should really be, the person who started the implementation for that deserves a lot of credit. He does. That's a huge accomplishment. And they clearly are leadership, in that case, the big step forward. And they really do. Has it been used effectively in the last 5 years? No. And that's where you look at the numbers, you begin to see real stories there. Look at the difference in the change in net worth, okay, change in net worth over your change in GDP over your change in net worth. Simple concepts, change in GDP, end period, beginning period, end period, and then over change and your net worth to kind of see the two. Because you're bringing the accountants in perspective and you're marrying two different, kind of families here. Look how it dashes down. US I was kind of not so happy with our own number, but it was like better than France. And France, by the way, we had to put their pension funds on their balance sheet. Where's Gerhard Sager? We had to take them off the footnotes, at least they disclosed them, and we were able to put them on, so they gave the ability to do that, which from an investor's point of view, I'm fine with that. As long as you give them in the footnote, and we'll take the time, you just give the information, that's bravo. Now, did we then look at this return on assets, which is Dag Dieter, if he's here, in the back. Dag Talks has this great book that you'll read. Also, Professor Soul has a nice book too, which you all have copies of. If you're lucky, you can get him to sign it for both of them. It's pretty good. We look at return on assets. So how are you doing as a management team? We take your change in net worth, and we simply divide it by your assets. It's called return on assets. It's a very, very standard concept that's been used for probably like centuries, and you're applying it here. Now let's look at return on assets. And what we did is we took all the years from which data is available, and we averaged them. So if you had the data, we averaged them. So it wasn't like 1 year. Unfortunately, for those who just did newer financials, you kind of hit a financial crisis, and you're kind of maybe pulling out of it, so you didn't get the benefit of like earlier years, but that's the data that's available. So if it's available, we took it. Look at the difference. New Zealand, again, at the top, with actually a positive return on net assets. It's extraordinary. But I guess, Ian, your social system, your education system, your transparency, your healthcare system are really kind of the bottom of the barrel, like Albania. Maybe not. And you kind of cascade down, and you look at it. Unfortunately for us, again, the US, it's just like, yeah, I mean, David's right. You know, as a taxpayer, a big, big taxpayer, you start looking at these numbers and you say, okay, let's have a dialogue. Let's begin a dialogue. You're responsible, you are the steward of those assets and those steward of those liabilities. We'd like to have a dialogue because currently there is not a dialogue. It's a reflex reaction to try to dismiss it, run, and hide. And there's a full presentation on this, by the way. I think, Franz, are you here? Franz has got a full presentation on this, so he's a great one to ask questions. He's much more skillful on this than I am. I mean, I'm obviously just a low-level business person, so this stuff's really high-level, kind of, you know, rarefied politician stuff. Net worth is a percentage of GDP. Maybe someone would ask, how does this compare to other countries as a start? As a start, let's look at the numbers. UK is not so bad. France, again, you look at their measurements, these numbers, again, it begins the dialogue. Use the numbers. They're available. They are meaningful. And then we did this value gap analysis for Greece, which I'm not going to go into, but we ended up taking this and said, okay, now that we have a balance sheet for Greece, okay, which is a preliminary one, a working framework, probably not going to be that far off. We were very close on the debt number. We then took it and said, what would happen with its return on assets if it performed even as well as France, which I think, Krista Megarian, because you're doing, Ian, France, are they at the bottom on return on assets, I think, France? Yeah. So we said, look, all you have to do is perform as well as like the bottom compared to where you are. And you just simply run the numbers. This isn't like, these are basic numbers, which we're happy to go through. They're simple, algorithmic, they're not quantitative modeling. I know you're going to hate them. You can't do statistical variances on them, okay? But they're really basic financial analysis and stock. Look at the GDP potential. That's a gap. And if you want to sit down and start looking at line item by line item and say, why do you think their numbers are so bad? Let's start with their human management, the quality, and the meritocracy. Let's talk about the systems they have and how much training they're providing to their people to improve every year in the job they're doing. Anyone want to guess how much training the government provides its middle-level management each year as a percentage of their time on improving their skills and bases? Like close to zero. How many of them have universities in place internal to their organizations to make sure their people are performing more effectively? It's atypical, not typical. And I think that is it. We did the degree, so you kind of get a sense of what they are. And if I had to leave with one closing comment, this would be it. You need to get qualified people. You can't take people who have never done something before, put them in high-profile, very difficult positions, and expect them to execute. It's unfair, and it's only going to end up in disaster, and you're going to see it in your numbers. They won't be able to calculate their debt numbers, their debt relief. They won't own ESA. They won't own the financial sector. They can't talk to the rating agencies. You're just going, and my time is out.